Okay, I believe we are live now. I would like to start by thanking all our guests here, all our participants. My name is Tariq Bawab. I am the Dean of Engineering and Applied Science at Nile University, and we have the pleasure to be organizing this webinar. We have a talk by Professor Vincent Chan, MIT professor and the president of IEEE Communication Society, and the topic is future network architectures and influences of the pandemic. Talk about technical, funding, regulations, and policy aspects of this. I am going just to take very little of your time now, giving you an overview of what the program is about and what we'll be doing. Our program is essentially, we'll start with a word by Dr. Tariq Khalil, the Nile University president, followed by a talk by Dr. Syed Azzouz, the VP for Infrastructure Technologies at NTRA. Dr. Azzouz is representing His Excellency Dr. Tala, the Minister of Communications and Information Technologies in this talk. Then we'll have the main event, about 50 minutes talk by Dr. Chan, and this will be followed by questions and answers. One of the things that worth mentioning most is the logistics, just for everybody to be aware of how things are going. In case you just notice that you can't unmute yourself, and in other times you will be able to mute yourself. We have basically set up the audio for all participants in such a way to maximize your benefit from this talk so that everything flows smoothly. Please feel free to ask questions whenever you want. The questions can be asked either on the chat sidebars to your screen, or if you are watching through Facebook, you can ask the question there. We have a team collecting these questions as we speak. Two of my colleagues, professors in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, is collecting the questions, and the questions are being compiled, coordinated, and posted into an open shared file, a Google file, where they will be mapped into categories and organized properly, and they will be deferred until we are over, until the main event is over, and we'll have an open Q&A session where all questions will be asked. And as necessary, I might read the questions for Dr. Chan to answer in certain instance, and also may ask the guest if so desirable, to read the question himself. So in order to do this as smooth as possible, there will be instances where we have hard muting. Hard muting means that you cannot unmute yourself. There's nothing wrong in your computer, and don't worry about it. Soft muting, it means that you can mute yourself, and there will be an instance of time where it will be open and not muted at all. All are designed to your benefit so that you can really get as much as possible out of this webinar. I want to thank you so much for taking part of your time to join us, and we'll get started by me asking Dr. Tariq Khalil to take it over. So I will stop sharing and basically give Dr. Tariq Khalil the opportunity to speak up. Dr. Tariq, please unmute yourself first, and then you go ahead.
I am on mute, I think.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody hearing me?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Tariq, and I would like to welcome Dr. Vincent Chan and all our attendees this evening on behalf of Mr. Amr Musa, the chairman of Nile University Board of Trustees, who is with us on this call, and all members of the board and the advisory board, and our faculty and students, and obviously of myself. And we appreciate Dr. Chan's acceptance of our invitation to be our guest tonight to discuss a topic of great importance, particularly these days of post-COVID-19 world. It's indeed a new world that now all of us are facing and we have never witnessed before. I don't think anybody in humanity have witnessed this moment before. It has forced us to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we interact with one another, the way we educate, and the way we do business. At the heart of the new world is digitization and methods of communication. I know that when this virus hit the world, and in late February, early March, we were planning to host the 29th International Conference on Management of Technology on Nile University campus with attendees from more than 40 countries from all over the world. And we had to postpone the conference because nobody was able to travel. And the conference was postponed to September, and now it's going to be a virtual conference. I have never attended a virtual conference before. When the government decided to shut down schools and universities in the middle of March, we transformed all our educational materials on the digital platform. And miraculously, we did this in less than 3 weeks due to the hard work of our faculty and staff and TAs and RAs. And we started to offer interactive seminars online with students using Zoom, such as the way we are doing it right now. This was in the beginning of April, and we have been doing so since then. We started holding our meetings online. Our greatest fear at the time was the network capacity. Would it hold? Would we be able to navigate in the virtual environment and in the increasingly digital world in which we all live today? Can every student and stakeholder have access? Well, we have many questions, and that's why tonight's lecture is extremely important. Our speaker tonight and his topic are extremely timely and of great importance to answer some of these questions and maybe address some of the worldwide concerns that everybody has. So again, I welcome Dr. Chan. Thank you for being with us. I look forward to your remarks, and I think we can interact with you now after the session and hopefully in the future. We do have now a talk, a short welcome by the representative of His Excellency Dr. Tala, the Minister of Communication and Information Technology, who is responsible for the entire network and infrastructure in Egypt. And I would like to welcome Dr. Saeed Azzouz, who is the Vice President of NTRA, that's the National Telecommunications Regulatory Agency in Egypt. And Dr. Azzouz will give us a word on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Talat. And Dr. Azzouz is the Vice President of الجهاز القومي لتنظيم الاتصالات لتكنولوجيا البنية التحتية. I think Dr. Azzouz is going to give his words in Arabic, and then we'll switch back to English later on. So Dr. Azzouz, welcome, and please take the mic.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum.
Are you hearing me well?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tala. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will start my speech by Arabic, and then I will switch at the end to welcome Professor Chen at the end of my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, السيدات والسادة الحضور الكرام، أسعد الله أيامكم جميعا وحفظكم من كل سوء. إنه لا يشرفني اليوم أن أتحدث إليكم نيابة عن معالي الأستاذ الدكتور عمرو طلعت وزير الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات المصري، وأنقل لكم جميعا تحياته واعتذاره عن عدم المشاركة لارتباطه بالتزامات مسبقة، وأبلغكم تمنياته بالتوفيق والنجاح لكم جميعا. وكما تعلمون جميعا أن لمصر مكانة متميزة في تاريخ وحضارة البشرية، تنطلق في المقام الأول من رصيدها الثقافي والحضاري، وما كان ليتسق مع ذلك أن تتراجع الدولة المصرية عن دورها الريادي في الانفتاح على العالم لتبادل الرؤى والخبرات بهدف توطين وتوظيف السياسات والتكنولوجيات وأساليب الإدارة الحديثة في تطوير منظومة إدارة الموارد والخدمات الأساسية التي يحتاجها المواطن، من خلال العمل الدؤوب على تقليص الفجوة بين المجتمعات الأكثر نمواً والمجتمعات النامية. ويبرز أهمية التعاون وتبادل الخبرات جلياً في مواجهة التحديات التي تتجاوز حواجز الزمان والمكان. ولعل اجتياح وباء كورونا المستجد كوفيد-19 العالم في أقل من 6 أشهر هو من أكبر التحديات التي واجهت العالم على الإطلاق. ومن أهم وسائل التغلب على هذه الجائحة كان العمل والتعلم عن بعد، وذلك أدى إلى تسخير العقول والأدوات المتاحة للتخلص من النماذج النمطية لإدارة ومباشرة الأعمال، والتي تحتاج إلى التنقل والعمل في مكان واحد ربما يكون أضيق مما توفره الإمكانيات التكنولوجية، فضلاً عن التعليم عن بعد والتشخيص عن بعد ورصد معدلات انتشار الفيروس وتوظيف الذكاء الاصطناعي واستخدام أحدث التكنولوجيات والتطبيقات في مجال الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات في إدارة مثل هذه الأزمات والحد من آثارها على المجتمعات. السيدات والسادة الحضور، إن تطويع وتوظيف نظم الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات على نطاق واسع في مختلف القطاعات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والأكاديمية لم يعد مسألة خيار فحسب بالنسبة للبلدان المتطلعة لزيادة معدلات النمو وتحقيق طفرات ملموسة في وقت وجيز، ومنها الدولة المصرية العظيمة. والأهم من ذلك كله أن تكون كافة الخدمات ذات جودة عالية وتحقق أهم أهدافها، وهو العمل على تسهيل الحياة بمختلف جوانبها ومتطلباتها على المواطنين. هذا ما دعا إليه السيد رئيس الجمهورية السيد عبد الفتاح السيسي. ولقد واجه قطاع الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات في مصر مجموعة من التحديات لكي يتمكن المواطنون من مباشرة أنشطتهم اليومية في ظل الإجراءات الاحترازية التي اتخذتها الدولة للحد من انتشار فيروس كوفيد-19 كورونا المستجد. ونتج عن ذلك زيادة في الاعتماد على شبكات الإنترنت واستخدام أدوات التواصل والعمل والتعلم عن بعد. ورغم هذه الزيادة الغير متوقعة والمفاجئة أن شبكات الإتاحة وشبكات البنية الأساسية استطاعت استيعاب كافة المطالب. السيدات والسادة الحضور، وفي هذا الشأن فقد قامت وزارة الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات وهيئاتها التابعة بتبني نهجاً واضحاً في الموائمة بين تحفيز الطلب على الخدمات وبين توفير بنية أساسية قوية يمكن الاعتماد عليها في توفير خدمات الاتصالات الأساسية وخدمات الحكومة الإلكترونية، وصولاً إلى الخدمات الذكية من خلال العمل الجاد والحثيث مع كافة الأطراف ذات الصلة. وقد أسهم تطوير شبكات البنية الأساسية للاتصالات خلال الأعوام السابقة لظهور تلك الجائحة في توفير مطالب الاستخدام الكثيف للأفراد وللمؤسسات. وفي نهاية كلمتي أتقدم بعظيم الشكر والتقدير للسادة الزملاء والأساتذة، السيد الأستاذ الدكتور عمرو موسى، السيد الأستاذ الدكتور طارق خليل رئيس جامعة النيل، السيد الأستاذ الدكتور طارق البواب عميد كلية الهندسة والعلوم التطبيقية بالجامعة، على حسن تنظيم هذا المحفل الكبير، وأؤكد لكم دعم الحكومة المصرية ممثلة في وزارة الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات لهذا الحدث، وحرصها على المشاركة في سبيل بناء مستقبل أفضل لأوطاننا وللإنسانية جميعا. I'm going to switch to English to welcome Mr. or Professor Chan. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Vincent Chan to be with us today. I'm sure we will gain a valuable information from his lecture that will include huge information in different telecommunication aspects. And finally, on behalf of His Excellency, Professor Amri Talat, the Minister of Communication and Information Technologies, let me convey to you all his regards and best wishes, and thank you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran lakum.
شكرا جدا يا فندم. I want to thank Dr. Azuz for his kind words and on behalf of the minister. And now we pretty much come to the point of the main event. And I would like to just introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Vincent Chan. And I'm going to go briefly over a reduced version of his bio, the extended version of which I believe has been shared with all of you. Vincent is John and Erwin Jacobs Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at MIT. He was an assistant professor in the beginning of his career at Cornell University before he goes back to MIT, his alma mater, where he got all his degrees. He joined MIT Lincoln Labs in 1977 and had been head of the Communications and Information Technology Division until becoming the director of the Laboratory for Information and Decision Systems in 1999 through 2007. Currently, he's a member of the Shannon's Communication and Network Group at the Research Laboratories of Electronics of MIT. He initiated several important programs at MIT, including the Laser Intersatellite Transmission Experiment Program and including the GeoLight program. He formed some of the most important networking research consortia in the history of our field, such as the All Optical Network Consortium, which encompassed MIT, AT&T, and DEC. For those who are not as old as me, DEC used to be a big company, a big computing company. DEC stands for Digital Equipment Corporation. He also launched the Next Generation Internet Consortium. He was the PI of that consortium and several others. He served many US and international government advisory boards and committees, was active with several startups and board member of a Fortune 500 network company. I believe he didn't mention the name for I don't know, for advertisement purposes, and we shouldn't use this. He chaired the company's technical advisory board. Vincent is a member, like me, of Eta Kappa Nu, but he also has Tau, Beta, Pi, and Sigma Xi, and he is a life fellow of an IEEE and a fellow of the Optical Society of America. He served the board of governors of IEEE Communication Society in so many capacities before he becomes the current president of the board. Throughout his career, Vincent has spent his research focus, has stretched his research focus over multiple areas, but communication and networks was his primary, was his neck of the woods, essentially, particularly in free space optics and fiber optic communication, networks and satellite communication. His work has led the way to a successful laser communication demonstration in space and in early deployment of WDM. For those who are not specialists, WDM is wavelength division multiplexed optical networks. His recent research his recent research emphasis is on algorithmically optimized heterogeneous networks. He does a lot of work in heterogeneous networks, and I had the pleasure to attend one of his NSF workshops in this regard. And their performance under strange operating conditions. Last but not least, and I have the pleasure to say that Vince is a friend of mine. We have known each other for more than 15 years, when his focus was mainly on the optical networking technical committee of COMSOC, and I was basically chairing the competing TC TAO's transmission access and optical systems. We have worked together a lot. I have the pleasure to serve with him in the BOG of COMSOC. And recently, when my daughter started to study in Boston, I had the pleasure that our families also know each other. Vincent, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop my sharing, and we are all ears and hopeful to enjoy your wonderful talk as usual.
Thank you very much, Tarek, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. This is not the first few graphs. Let me go back. Okay, so it's a pleasure for me to give this lecture. I just want to tell all of you in Egypt that I was always fascinated with Egypt. In fact, my dream trip is to take a 2-week cruise up the Nile with a history professor and visit all the historic sites and have him tell me about the rich history of Egypt. And I have yet to do this in my life. If this has been an in-person meeting, I would have done so after the talk, but I would have to wait until pandemic is over. And at that point, I would come and personally shake hands with all of you. I accepted this invitation from Tarek. Not only is he a friend of mine, I twisted his arm when I formed my own board of governors in January to be a director in the Communication Society. So I guess I owe him to do whatever he wants. On the other hand, I think this is an extremely important topic. The use of network and communication technology in the pandemic is really come to the forefront. Without it, imagine what would happen. So interestingly, many of the technology people are using has its heritage from some of the inventions and pioneering work of some of our members in the Communication Society, from wireless to the early days of internet and networking. In fact, some of the fathers of the internet, most of them are still alive, and many of them actually I know well. Some of them had been at MIT before when they were student or junior faculty. So I'm proud to work on network and communication technology, and it has impact in this pandemic. On the other hand, this pandemic brings this very important technology to the limelight. And it is more than the technical aspect. It is also about social economic impact of this technology in the day and age of a pandemic or even post-pandemic. I think the new normal after the pandemic will be very different. And the question to us is, in addition to improving the technology, which we should, what else should we be thinking about in terms of policies and regulation and who funds the system? So I would intermix my comment today between technical aspect and the future 5G and 6G and what is networking moving to us in the future, and how the pandemic highlights some of the necessary changes or addition in the technical aspect and also in the social economic aspect of this technology. So I want to show you the new paradigm as of a few years ago, maybe a decade. The traditional world of service provider, your telephone company, your TV company that provide both entertainment and internet service to you, change a little bit. here comes the what I call the web scale technology, the Apples, the Google, and the Facebook, and the Microsoft, and Tencent, and Alibaba of the world. In those areas, they actually provide more than just transport, but lots of contents. In fact, content is the driver. If you look at the undersea capacity today, actually more than 90% of the capacity is owned by these web scale companies, not by the telecom traditional operators. So that tells you that things are very different in the last few years than ever before. In fact, on the left side of the major data center that many of this company own, and I only listed the American ones. Of course, there are many Asian and European data centers sprinkled around the world. So that is a new paradigm, which is content-based. If you look at what's going on in terms of the network and how it's actually going to be used, the network is no longer going to be a very simple transport like a sewage system, like a utility. It actually is much more intelligent than that. It would actually mediate between application, as we are using Zoom and WebEx today, deal with cloud, deal with all kinds of analytics, storage, and computing services with all kinds of people on a campus, in branches of companies or government, and also with mobile user. The idea is that this technology requires dynamically tailored network configuration, which is the thought that I want you to keep in mind when I go on in this particular talk. And as I said before, now is 90%, and it's going to be that way in the foreseeable future. Just to bring everybody to speed on a paradigm which I think is beginning to be installed now in the next 5 years is going to look this way. The future networking, not only does it have the communications and the network aspect, but it would also have cloud storage and cloud processing. In fact, all of these medium would work together. I'm going to reserve the word orchestration later towards the talk. But what's happening is that all the medium, from wireless to fiber to many of these other computing services, including edge computing, work in concert to provide services. The fiber is used for the backhaul. In fact, the fiber may actually conduct the RF or microwave signal all the way to the processing center for processing. This allows multiple antenna elements to actually gang together in the processing center to perform beamforming, actually antenna nulling, and many kinds of location and signal processing. So it is a very important future that there is spatial and temporal multipath resolution using multiple access points. And this would allow us to reduce interference and at the same time increase data rate. There's a feedback from somewhere. Maybe we should have some of this transmitter muted.
Yeah, it's okay now. It's okay.
Yeah, okay, fine. So the key innovation, in addition to antenna processing, are massively parallel low-cost computing cloud, which can be used for communication and also application processing. And very interestingly, low-cost fast A to D. A to D to get today can go as high as 100 gigasample per second. That's really very fast. And that allows us to conduct a lot of analog signal even in the microwave area to processing center for processing. And last but not least is the presence of very fast algorithm, including AI and machine learning, and they would do a whole lot in the future, which I'm going to have a lot to say about later. So first, let's talk about pandemic and the use of virtual platform. As every one of you know, we have been using a lot of the virtual platform for education, business negotiation, remote medical consultation, and all these things. And the type of platform, people are used to WebEx and Zoom, and then there are more fancy ones. One of them is ON24. In addition to being able to do teleconference like what we're doing over Zoom, ON24 does some more, like virtual tour of multiple rooms. You can make yourself walk into rooms, interact with those who happen to be in the room or choose to be in the room. So that's a locality aspect of it. And also you can participate in community of interest. So if you're interested in a conference on wireless access point, you can find among the thousands of people in the conference a group of 10, 20 people who wants to talk about this subject. So it is not perfected. In fact, we just had a virtual conference done this week, and we use Zoom. There are lots of things to improve on. So we now have to ask ourselves, what kind of broadband access is required to do business? As we talk about, and the pandemic really makes it come to the forefront. The application, first of all, is to education. My school, of course, had gone virtual, and there were plenty of courses and material now offered on the web. Conferences for sure, business negotiation, remote medical consultation, that's very important. More than 80% of the medical consultations in the last few months are remote. Sporting events, actually, we in America love sports, and they are thinking about how to do this event without an audience. Only the players are present, and how do they beam the real-time game to all the audience, and religious services as well. How do you participate? So the technology requirement of virtual meetings, you need to have a minimum of a couple of megabits per second to get high enough resolution video. And actually on the high end, which I want to explain, it requires multi-gigabit per second. We are actually on the low end right now. Most people are actually closer to low end. So the question is, how much data rate is enough? I think that 10 megabit for low-end video conferencing and education, that's sufficient for the time being, although not ideal, but it's good enough for the time being. For future, 100 megabit for high-end conferencing. And I said low-end business. Why? It turns out Cisco actually make another version, not WebEx, of Cisco conferencing, which I had fielded at MIT, a experimental copy. They have 3 very high resolution screen, and also sharing. It's the forerunner of WebEx, and it requires tens of megabits per second. And the higher end even requires some more. It's not fielded yet, because most people don't have that capacity. And if you really want good business negotiation and meeting, you really need gigabit per second. And maybe you should have interactive virtual reality as well. The ultimate, which I think it would be required, has a high data rate of 10 gigabit per second. My God, 10 gigabit per second, we're talking about huge amount of increase in data rate, like 3 orders of magnitude. Who wants 10 gigabit per second? Actually, I'll give you an example. I was treated recently in a research lab where a big room has an entire wall of video. And what I could do is hold a tennis racket, and I'm playing tennis with a guy on the other side of the network. Wow, that's really something. In addition to being very high resolution, it's more than 8K. It's probably, I don't know, many times HDTV resolution, so that you actually feel like the person is on the other side. But in addition to that, I can actually have very high quality audio. I can hear the ball hit by his record or her record. And also I can hear it bounce. I can hear it hit the tape of the net. And I can see from the field of view, when I turn to hit a ball, I can see the other person's position from the corner of my eye. So there has to be a three-dimensional image presented to me, and also associated with it what I call a three-dimensional sound field. That means the sound must come from the location where the event is in a very broad field of view area. If you are audiophile, you probably would know what I mean by three-dimensional sound field. If you look very carefully on the right-hand side of my shoulder, you will see a vacuum tube power amplifier that helps me to produce that sound field. It's non-trivial. If you want to do a digitized version of it, it's actually gigabit per second. And if you want to play ball, a tennis match, you need very low delay. The minimum is 80 millisecond is barely enough. People would like it to be something like 20. So anyway, so that's the high end. We're not there yet. We're somewhere between 10 and 100 megabits for most people. In addition to those rates, there's more than that. You have to have resilient connections so that you wouldn't have choke points and you wouldn't have freeze frame and you wouldn't have loss of the application and you have to restart. So I started working with the industry, AT&T, in 1990, and we were negotiating with AT&T about high data rate. At that point, they was trying to sell 1 megabit per second to the customer. So the VP of research, Bob Lucky, one of our members of ComSoc, many of you may know him, asked me, hey, how much data rate is enough for business negotiation? Okay, so I said, well, I can't tell you what the data rate is. It's more than data rate. It's the presentation, is all these things I just said. And I said, you would know that it's good enough for very serious business negotiation when the video and audio are good enough to play serious poker with. I don't know how many poker players among you, but that's not a game of chance. That's a very psychological signaling, subtle signaling kind of game. And it requires all this high resolution stuff. Okay, so how are we doing in terms of supporting this kind of data rate in the future? And what I would come to what needs to be changed in lieu of the pandemic. Well, in the metropolitan area, you have the fiber, which is that line in the middle. And then you have wireless access point, and these are Internet of Things points and also mobile user. And then you have edge computing called fog, okay? And then you have centralized cloud and an engine here to do what is called orchestration. This network engine is the brain of the network. It's all automated. No human should be in the loop. And this orchestration engine has been programmed by the operator using their policy, the price structure, to orchestrate services for the user. Some user really require time deadline service. If I'm actually doing real-time gaming, I really want time sensitive deadline service. If I'm doing fast trading, I definitely want very short time delay. However, if I'm downloading a movie, it doesn't matter if it's 5 seconds or 8 seconds to download the whole movie into my local cache. So I don't need that kind of time deadline service. So the orchestration engine should be able to understand the services required and orchestrate the services across this infrastructure to suit that, that particular service. What is the, and I'll come back to the alternative, okay? One of the things is the following. When I'm talking about mediation and being very smart, and looking at the content of each one of the sessions and what they want in terms of data rate, time deadline, and things like that. Human cannot do this. There shouldn't be operators. It has to be automated. But unfortunately, if you look at the complexity of controlling the system, as you increase in time, you can also think of it as increase in data rate, the complexity becomes so difficult that no human can do it. So you need to have smarter algorithm. And the intelligence in the algorithm is very necessary. And I'm coming back to that in just a bit to talk about the importance of intelligence. This is the break point at this particular juncture of network development. So I want to talk about orchestration a little bit and what it does and what it does not do, okay? Clearly, I said in the future, you need this to do the right thing. The current system performance, when you do video conferencing, there has been some impediment, some of which is low delivery rates, freeze frames, sometimes the application crash, and sometimes they have security issue and low display resolution depending on your device. So what is the option to improve the infrastructure to make the performance better? Well, one obvious way of doing it is to install capacity, which is what people are doing now. It's called over-provisioning. You never let the network get congested. You never let the server get overwhelmed. So you have to increase its I/O speed. Well, that's easier said than done. You can do it, but it costs you an arm and a leg. In fact, in order for many of this congestion behavior not to show up, your network should be loaded only up to about 15 to 20%. And that's much too low in loading for you to recover your investment. So it sounds simple, but you can't afford it. Orchestration is the solution, where it's content-based dynamic services, where in this block, it would take the service you need and you would mediate with the low-end network and also the computing service to deliver the service. But you have to have the smartness. You have to increase your complexity of your control plane. So it's very important to have a sophisticated network control plane and service quality driven. Now you need to talk about regulation and policy, which I'm coming in the next couple of view graphs, and pricing, so that people can afford it. But this is the solution of some in terms of philosophy. This is the philosophy of what you should know. So I want to talk about a very important subject now called the affordable broadband access to all, as one of the major questions that follow us in the pandemic. So I'll give you a very specific example. Example is that you notice that education now is now remote and virtual. Not only university education with large number of courses, but also high school and grade school. However, not every family has broadband Wi-Fi. In fact, some families in US doesn't even have Wi-Fi. They at most have a smartphone, but they have limited data plan also because of cost issue. So now the gulf of rich and poor is now accentuated because the one who have a high resolution monitor, Wi-Fi, and multiple platform now can enjoy much better programming and actually have a much better experience with the educational material. The ones who doesn't have the facility would be actually very handicapped. In fact, when you show up in class, you don't distinguish the rich and the poor, and they all receive the same instruction for the teacher. Now the digital divide and the gulf in data rate make you actually experience the difference in resources. And this gulf would widen as time goes on. Imagine the student didn't get high quality education because he's trying to squint his eye to look at the smartphone, whereas the other guy had a 30-inch monitor and high quality audio. And then it would be very hard to catch up if this goes on. Now, post-pandemic, I would still see a lot of material being on the web. No longer is it just in-person meeting. I don't think it's going to change. It will be a hybrid. Then how are these disadvantages going to catch up? I think this gulf would widen, and it doesn't take too long. I would say 6 months to a year, you will see the effect. And unfortunately, many of these disadvantaged people in terms of capacity, after a while, they're not going to be as savvy as the one who get the full treatment. And sometimes they be labeled unfairly as intellectually inferior, which is a shame. So I think universal broadband access that's affordable has to be enforced somehow by the community. When community does it, it's not going to be profit driven. It's not going to be done by the operator. The government and public policy must somehow institute such affordable universal access. In the US, there's such an example. In the 50s, there's a thing called a Carter phone landmark case in the Supreme Court when Bell chose to only supply phone service to the people in the city. And when you live very far away in remote places in a farm, because they need to pull a long wire to you, they will lose money if they give you a phone service. They did not install phone. And then the court case said you have to provide access to everyone. And even if you lose money, you have to provide it at the same cost as the one that you have easy access to. So I think some kind of public policy of such thing has to be done. Now, is it easy or is it hard? Well, let me tell you, this week I found out in the country of Ireland, they have decided to provide 150 megabit access to everyone. What that means is that they have to increase the rate of access of 500,000 homes. This is at the cost of several $1 billion to the Irish government. Well, it's a medium-sized country. And in terms of geographic span, it's also not very large. I don't even know whether we can push such a policy through in the United States. So this is a very difficult question, but it's doable. So now let me talk about content-based routing and charging versus something called net neutrality. For a long while, people in the internet, especially some of the pioneers, saying the internet service provider cannot treat communication with different colors. You have to treat everything with equality. You can't discriminate or charge differently based on user content, website, platform application, and things like that. Well, in its pure form, it has to be changed because in order to be able to support many of this conferencing and platform, you need to have content-based routing. And also when you try to have access to the disadvantage, the charging, the pricing has to be different. So I think this has to be totally rethought through, not by just the technologists, but by sociologists and economists. Okay, are there any hope? Yeah, I painted a kind of interesting picture, but the answer is yes. This is the hope. Maybe this is the prayer. I show this particular photo because I take an example. There are many low Earth orbit satellites now that are proposing to provide internet service to many places in the world that doesn't have fiber and wireless connectivity. SpaceX, OneWeb. And this particular example I pick is Amazon's Project Pupa. It has 3,200 satellites. It has low latency, very low latency because the satellite's in low Earth orbit, and it is will provide unserved and underserved communities around the world, which has about 4 billion population. I picked the picture on the left because Egypt is conspicuously in here, and they would have many satellites over Egypt plan. And I actually talked to the person who was in charge, the senior vice president in charge of this. I asked him, how much? Okay. You know, to get he was touting gigabit access. I said, okay, gigabit. I pay for 100 megabit per second, $100 a month. It's not affordable. He said, how about $10 a month for gigabit? I said, really? I hope he's right. I haven't seen the design and the cost benefit and all the life cycle costs of the deployment. But Amazon is a pretty serious company, as we know. I hope he's right, because this may actually change the equation and actually produce universal access. And he said gigabit. Now, notice earlier I said at least 10 megabit is required. If 10 megabit is required, can I reduce that 10 to $3 a month? You know, $10 a month is non-trivial to some population on Earth. It is affordable a little bit, but it would be much nicer if it is $2 or $3 a month. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the things that changes the technology development and future. You heard about contact tracing. Baseline is very simple. If we identify a person who have been infected, we want to know who he has contact with. If he contacts 4 people, I want to trace them. And if they are in turn infected, I want to confirm it. Hopefully I can ask him to go test. And then in addition to him, I want to know who else he has contact with to go down the tree and try to help contain the pandemic. For those of them who never get it, I would just leave them alone. So this idea is not new. The idea is just to interrupt the transmission and reduce the spread via isolation and proactive treatment. The only thing different is now we are relying on sensor and networking technology, so the time scale is much faster. We cannot wait for a week or a month. In the old days when we hardly travel, it's okay to probably wait for a couple of days. The infected person is not going on the plane and travel halfway around the world. Today now is not possible. So this is very important. Stuff are going on right now. You probably know. What are some of the contact tracing technology? I picked this picture because this is Boston. On one side is Boston on the river, and on this side is Cambridge, and this is MIT under this yellow boundary. It's a case where there is someone detected to have the virus, probably just landed in the airport and took a taxi to the hotel, high-end hotel in Copley Square. And he contacted several people. For me, I want to know who he has contacted, and the guy crossed the river and come to my campus. In fact, I want to avoid him like the plague. In fact, he is the plague, right? So the question is, how fast can I detect him? Okay. Now, this is non-trivial, okay? Not only do I need to locate the person who is infected, first of all, I have to decide he's infected. I'll come to that in just a bit. I need to have his GPS location. So he has to turn on location tracking of his smartphone. I want to see where he went into my building. So video camera needs to assess his presence. Now I have to do face recognition. There are many face recognition programs in the world. And that's a key technology in tracing where everybody has gone to. However, All this is easier said than done. To some extent, it's done in some country. They use it to penalize people for jaywalking or littering or whatever. There's a privacy issue involved in it. So there has to be a dialogue between the legal community, the government, and to talk about what kind of policy regulation should be there and still not suspend civil liberty. There is no easy answer to this. There is a trade-off. And can somebody opt not to do it? If you don't do it for a large fraction of the population, this whole thing is for moot. Even if you do it, who funds it? Is it the nation that funds it from taxpayer money? Is it up to the local people to do it? Is it going to be donation by private citizen? That's going to be a little tricky, right? So these are questions that must be answered, but there is no simple answer right now. I want to talk about something even more advanced. In order to set the stage, I want to talk about what is called cognitive and resilient network. The network of the future is going to have this smartness, and it is captured in this cognitive engine. It actually looks at the traffic, and even when the traffic is dormant, it would probe the network actively and try to figure out the network state. And the idea is to make sure the network is not overwhelmed. It has to make decisions on load balancing, reconfiguration, and restoration of down parts. And moreover, he has to predict the intention of the user so that when he is driving a big truck through, I have enough resources to get out of the way. And if not, I would have to somehow slow him down. So I need to think about his intention and recommend appropriate actions, either by the operator or signal the user to please reduce your data rate and your hosing of the network. So the idea is that this also had to look in reliability aspect, because if you overwhelm and congest the network, there goes the reliability. And then there's a security aspect. When you're trying to bring data about certain areas for processing, you want to make sure some of this data, first of all, is genuine, and second, it arrives on time, and the network is not being jammed. So I want to talk about how to use this for an advanced version of contact tracing. I call that future emerging approaches and solutions. I think the most important thing in the pandemic we learned is that early detection is very, very good. We can contain the damage. So we need to install high sensitivity, high selectivity sensor. There are smartphones on your body, a number of things. You do everything, IoT. We want to find the parents of that pandemic or that local hotspot. In fact, if we find patient zero, so much the better. But we can't take forever doing it. The response management has to find the affected individual. So we involve collection, data processing, data analysis, and immediately make a decision on who and track them and disseminate the information to every interested party. Not everyone, but only interested party. That's the trick. We need to harvest and analyze the real-time digital footprint of infected groups and individuals through traffic analysis, sensors, all the social media. Give us a hint of what's going on in that local. I'll have a view graph next to talk about that. We want to talk about anomaly in the network. Something is happening in this network that doesn't seem to be normal. We want to know what it is. So machine learning algorithm to look at previous event and current event and identify something is different. Is it a pandemic? And weak analysis. When a hotspot goes on, we want to analyze how it spread. And it would help us in terms of learning how fast and what is the pattern of the spreading. So these are new emerging approaches, and some of them are just talk. They're not there yet. Some of them are actually under active research by many, many people. And this pandemic makes it accelerated. So this is an example of what it can be, an example. This is an example of H1N1 2009. You can find it in the reference I show you. It turns out WHO is the World Health Organization rely on the standard report and things like that, and provide the count of affected people in the red curve. If actually use as some of these things I am talking about, like infer biometric, sick people actually have a distinct digital footprint. He can go from this very active person biking around to look at this guy miserable, lying in bed and very sick. By the fact that he is there in midday and immobile and not move for a long time, and actually looking at the website for fever and diarrhea or respiratory distress, that he probably is sick, okay? So many of this data analytics can actually identify early effect of the spread of pandemic. In fact, this is a research paper, it's already 10 years old, that with those algorithms that was known then 10 years ago, you can predict the peak of the pandemic 2 weeks earlier than the World Health Organization. And I would say it is easily much better today. So many of these advanced technology can be used. They all use networking and sensing and data analytics and the like. Okay, the use of machine learning and AI is very important. And I don't want to talk about the nitty-gritty of where they are used and things like that, but I want to address the ones that are highlighted in red. In terms of application, you can actually find out that there are events that's occurring that are very unusual. All of a sudden, the pharmacy has 3 times the increase of people going to buy Tylenol, acetaminophen. Okay, my God, that's a fever outbreak. People are actually trying to buy decongestion, 5 times as much. Something is wrong in that particular city next to that pharmacy, okay? Network security. There is a big issue about, should I let you track me? Am I going to volunteer my signature to let you track me? It may help me if I'm being exposed, but what are you going to use with that particular information? Are you going to sell me something? Are you going to track me and things like that? Well, there's a civil liberty issue there. There's also a freedom issue there. So this is the same thing here, group association and tracking. You can actually say, oh, I meet this guy in the cafe. And because of contact tracing, I want to trace everyone. Are you trying to find out who my friends are? That's also an issue. So these are questions that you have to answer. The whole idea is that continuous assessment is required, and the data center is the brain of this whole system. And it looking at the data, it would say, okay, I see something unusual. Let me start a data analytic and look further into the healthcare system, the number of people in the hospital and things like that. In fact, I want to tell you that this actually worked. The people at Harvard this week announced that they suspect China had indication of the pandemic as early as October. They just used the Google map and look at the parking lot of the hospital, that somehow in October, the number of cars in the parking lot doubled that of previous year. And it is so in all the hospitals in Wuhan. So even that by itself tells you there is something going on and worthwhile of looking in a couple months earlier than you actually realize you have a problem. And that's very key to pandemic control. The last issue I want to talk about before I conclude is the whole idea of fake news and disinformation. It is very easy on social network to spread rumors, disinformation, and false information, and actually can drive public reaction into the wrong state. I'll give you an example that we have examined in 2014 in Napa Valley in California, the wine country. There was an earthquake, and there were a lot of fires and a serious issue. Some group actually put on actually injected it into a government web that says certain areas or certain roads for evacuation had traffic jam, and they advised them to take other roads. What happened was that wasn't so, and the other roads were all jammed up, and it really impeded the speed of evacuation. And then even worse, they would say, well, a certain city has armed insurgents that are robbing, try to avoid the city. In fact, there is none. Now, this is just being mischievous, okay? On the other hand, it makes a big difference in how you respond to pandemic and things like this. So what are the motivations? I don't know what the motivations are, but there are best practices that people follow. How can we have this? Well, that's not enough, it turns out, okay? So what are the potential solutions? It doesn't require invention, but it requires some kind of fortitude, stomach fortitude to do this. You can fact check whether this is true. You can say that this particular report is inconsistent with other reports. You don't have to make a judgment. You just have to point out the inconsistency and let the reader decide whether you believe this news or 20 other pieces of news that says otherwise. It needs extra cost of processing. That's the problem. One of these social network can do it. They have the facility, they have the know-how, but it requires significant processing to identify correlated reports that are contradictory and say there are 20 reports that doesn't support this. Okay, so the cost aspect is tough. They're not being paid for by the user. And when you do this, you may reduce revenue because some user who want to play mischief didn't want to subscribe to you. So number 4 and 5 in this particular case are the impediment of putting fact check on social network. That leads to whether you should use it by legislation. You should modify your policy and regulation and say, okay, you are responsible for somehow putting false news that are affecting the population. You don't have to make judgment. You can point out the inconsistency. Who funds such effort in terms of extra cost of processing? And can you install penalties for irresponsible practices? These are things that is under heated debate within the US and elsewhere in the world. I think it's a very important issue to tackle. So finally, one of the most important things is privacy and security. When you have your personal information being looked at by all kinds of algorithms, how can you be sure that your data is protected while being stored or actually while being processed? I want privacy. I want make sure nobody masquerades as me. So authentication and cryptography is very important. If everybody wants very strong privacy and don't contact tracing would be very difficult. So the question is, where's the right balance? How do you assure that the person under contact tracing, his other privacy is not compromised? And the quality assurance of the network so that when you need it, it will be there. And how do you screen out the real-time application? And something which I won't expand is graphic processing unit on the network actually can do real-time monitoring of session and tell you which are the important messages that has to go through. So I have some final thoughts, and then I would open for discussion. I think there is definitely open research required for many of these virtual platforms. They need to be improved. The biggest issue is the digital divide, the gulf between rich and poor. It cannot be solved by technology alone. It has to be a discussion on social economic impacts by everybody involved. It's a public discussion between the population and the business world. There will be a new normal, but many of these electronic mediums are here to stay. In fact, I'm going to appoint a ad hoc committee very soon in my society to look into what is the new normal, how are we going to conduct business in the future. It has to involve social, economic, policy, regulation, legal, and public funding aspect. It is not, if those of you who are interested, look into Ireland. They have a very healthy discussion and policy made, and see how they do it. Now, they are, of course, it's a smaller country, easier than a big country like the United States or even Egypt. So we have to pay attention to the disinformation and false information easily can drive society into undesirable and the wrong state. The wrong state is the key word. As we rely more and more on networking and information within the network, this becomes even more important. The conclusion is we need to have a balanced approach, not just technical, but economic and social aspect. We have to look into policy, regulation, public-private funding, and collaborations. Finally, I want to remark that if you look at many of the new and important engineering achievements in the world, many of them, not all of them, are triggered by unusual events. You think about the Second World War, the emergence of radar and cryptography. There was a reason. People working very hard to get it done. It's more than just speculated academic research. There is a goal, and this event called the Second World War had driven the innovative people to try to find a solution. I think the pandemic is such an event, and I think it would trigger everybody to think in a very agile way, and the time scale for innovation and adaptation and formulation of new solution is going to be 10, 100 times faster than it otherwise would be. So I think in the communications and network area, if we're going to be leading in this particular climate, we need to think about what we need to do, and not just technical, but engage policy people to talk about what are the right thing to do and how we go about doing it. So with that, I want to end my address, and I'll be happy to answer questions. And I would unshare my screen.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I really appreciate it. This was really very insightful and entertaining at the same time. I am guessing, based on what I see, is that those who have questions prefer to pose them on their own. So let me suggest that whoever has a question, maybe just raise hands here, and I can maybe have the help of my colleagues, Dr. Amr Sharif and Dr. Muhammad Saeed. There is a question by, just a moment. Dr. Ahmed Madian. Dr. Ahmed Madian is raising his hand. Dr. Ahmed Madian is an ECE professor. Dr. Ahmed, you can unmute yourself and please feel free to pose your question.
Yeah, Tarek, unshare your screen so we can see the bigger icons.
Sure,
yes.
Sure.
So I'm ready for the question.
Dr. Madian?
You have to unmute.
You have to unmute yourself. Mustafa, I think,
Okay, thank you.
Question, Dr.
It was, sorry, yeah, I am online now, sorry. It was not unmuted, I just get the permission now. Yeah, thank you, Professor Chan, for this nice talk. Actually, I got a lot of information from that. Yeah, it's very, very good talk. I have one question because of this pandemic of COVID-19. a lot of conferences now in Egypt has been canceled due to a problem with management. You know, most of the conferences are already designed just to have a human-human interaction, but this new situation has shifted a lot of ideas. So some of people has preferred even to cancel or shift the conference to another time slot. I was asking if you during your talk you were talking about WebEx tool and other tools. I think from IEEE they are recommending 2 tools for virtual conferencing: WebEx and also Google Meet.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and that's a very good question. Let me tell you, I actually spent a whole lot of time in the last 3 months trying to answer your question. I'll tell you why. We have 30 financially sponsored conferences in my society a year and 70 co-sponsor technical conferences. So we are facing this problem almost immediately. So here's the first thing I did. We look at the requirement of a in-person meeting and say, oh, we need to have a workshop, we need to interact, we need to have a fireside chat and all these things. We write down the list. And then we go to the virtual platform and say, can we do the same thing? Forget it. You're not going to get everything. You may get half of it. You have to adapt, okay? None of them are perfect, and I won't endorse anyone publicly. If you want, you can ask Tarek, and Tarek can ask me, and I'll tell you why we pick certain things. It's very, very tricky because when you talk and you look at the web of the various virtual platforms, they will tell you they will do all these things. What they don't tell you is how reliable is the connection, how much data rate, whether there's going to be intermittent. You have a board meeting, for example. Can you have raise your hand in sequence? You raise your hand to talk to me. The question is, can I see them in sequence? Can I actually have a secret ballot? The secret ballot, you can say, well, you know, he can vote by raising of the hand and you suppress who he is. But how do I know that is him? It could be somebody masqueraded him and vote. This is a real problem. I haven't found a solution yet, but somebody say, yes, there is. And I find a loophole in every solution. So we are looking into various things like this. That's why I said it's not perfect. And I would say if you have a conference, first of all, you have to somehow resolve that you may want to compromise a little bit on the quality of the interaction. It's not going to be the same. There are many things you do that may be accommodated, but then there are other things you do that cannot be accommodated. And each platform is different. So you need to tune it to your application to the platform. What I would advise you not to use all the platform because your IT staff is going to go crazy trying to figure out which one is which and why are they all different. And very soon they will get all confused, okay? So I would advise you to pick a couple of good ones and stick with it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, we have next question by Ahmed Saleh. Ahmed, can you unmute please before you speak?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tala. So basically, the question is, thank you first, Professor Chan, and I enjoyed very much the talk about the digital divide and how the new normal may widen the gap between the poor and the rich, especially when it comes to critical things like education and those things. So the critical question now is how, from policy perspective, how the government can support this kind of transition, because you know the operators will have to do more capital investments. They will have to reach more people. We see there has to be some sort of support in order to grant broadband access to the poor. but network neutrality, the low margin environment, and the new capex that needs to be invested, all these things are squeezing the operators kind of thing, and
Yes.
are preventing them from reaching these masses. So how can governments expedite these things? You know, for sure, definitely also the spectral issues and the licenses and these things.
Yes. So actually, very good question. Your question is the second layer of what I posed. First of all, I think we all agree that we should have somehow a way to provide minimum service to people that are disadvantaged. So it is not that everyone would need a gigabit per second, but what about 10 megabit per second to start? Now, even that, some of the profit-seeking operator, and they are all profit-seeking operators, there's no exception, would say, okay, even 10 megabit, I'll lose money on it. Well, there may be different ways of doing it. I'm not going to dictate which one. I think it depends on the country and the locality, but I would offer some solution. For example, in Ireland, the government decided that, okay, the operator doesn't have the incentive to support 150 megabit to disadvantaged homes at a reasonable price. So we're going to actually use taxpayer money, taxes. And they would then say, okay, we will subsidize the installation of 150 megabit. And the industry, the operator, then would have to accept the fact that in addition to the costs involved in supporting that 150 megabit, he would have the subsidy of the government, and hopefully he would also somehow pass some of these costs to the ones that have less difficulty getting 150 megabit per second. If you're, for example, servicing a big apartment building, all you have to do is bring a fiber to the building and you can get to 100 households. And for that reason, there is some kind of inequality, and people somehow may complain that how come my cost should be low and it is as high as this other guy who is in 2 miles off the road. Well, somehow the government has to think through this and make it a regulation or policy. I don't think there is any way around it. If some of you know how to get around this issue without government policy and regulation, I'll be willing to listen, but I don't think there is any. I think this is very important. This is not just about networking. It's not about television, entertainment. It's about equalizing the rich and the poor and give even equal access to the population.
I think Dr. Tariq Khalil has a question.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Chan. It's a wonderful lecture. And you have brought up many very, very important questions to be dealt with. One of the issues that you raised, and it attracted my attention quite a bit, is the issue of equality. And you drove the example of Ireland, that they were actually driving that by public policy, which is possible with the smaller countries or countries that have the means to do it. What's going to happen with the developing nations or the African countries and so on, when the resources are not available to do this? And are we just going to keep increasing the gap, between the digital gap between the people with means and the people that don't have the means to do this? Because it's going to increase, as you mentioned, in the quality of education, in the quality of business, in the quality of everything. How do we deal with that?
You're absolutely right. That's my number one worry, even before the pandemic. As you know that before the pandemic, this gulf is there. It
Yes.
just takes longer for the effect to show up. That's why the Amazon, the Facebook, and the OneWeb, and of the world, and the SpaceX, at least that's what they say, they try to provide universal access through satellites. And the reason is pulling fiber, for example, everywhere in Africa will be extremely costly, especially there are places whose access is not that easy. I hope they're right. I hope Amazon can provide $10 a month of service, maybe $3 for 10 megabit. In fact, I would think that is more important than $10 for gigabit. I think if that is true, then it would be good. I think eventually, if we don't do anything about it, independent of the pandemic, this is going to show up as a world problem, as a global problem. Okay, and we don't want it to by the time it shows up as a problem because of the gulf of knowledge, then it will be very difficult to reverse. The pandemic, unfortunately, accelerated this. This is like the Second World War. Okay, I would call upon everyone around the globe to consider this as to put it more in a morbid sense, called the Manhattan Project. U.S. had a Manhattan Project to work on nuclear weapon for the Second World War and try to produce one to try to end the war. And it is the Manhattan Project. I think we cannot wait. The pandemic highlighted the difference, and it's actually going to accelerate that difference. And we need to deal with it as a community, not just the engineer, but the government and the regulation, the public, the civic organization, the local community must work on this and try to find a solution. And give it to Ireland. They're more homogeneous, so it's easier for them to do. They are the trailblazer. There are others that really need to think through this very quickly. I think we need to form immediately task force, which are multidisciplinary with lawyers, regulators, pricing, businessmen, researchers, academics, engineers, and all work towards this goal of reducing this divide.
Next, I have a question which could be related to the one we just had, except probably the person asking it on Facebook, his name is Muhammad Amin, probably actually wants an opinion from you, not just, so he say, what's your view about how orbit broadband networks, low orbit broadband networks, excuse me, the font is very small, will they eventually replace traditional telecom service providers' data services, especially with such competitive $10 per gigabit per second service?
That's
this must be a young man who owns the internet for free.
You know, in the jargon of television programming, that's the 64 million question. That's actually more than the $64 million question. That's the $64 billion question, okay? There is a hope, but I've yet to see a cost structure with life cycle costs that convince me $10 per month is doable. But I wouldn't rule against this. I'll tell you why. Space system has a bad reputation in the past for being too costly. In fact, there was a really rule of thumb, which is hilarious, that for every pound of hardware you put in space, it costs $250,000. It doesn't matter if it's the sensor or weather satellite or communication satellite, $250,000 per pound. Well, that's not going to give you $10 per month. Because it requires trillion bit per second, many ground station and things like that. There is a hope. I'll tell you why. Because many of the space systems in the past require what is called space qualified parts that would survive in space for 5 to 10 years. And they typically cost 100 times more than the comparable ground segment electronic. So you buy a processor, it's 100 times more because of its pedigree, radiation hardening, qualification. What is even worse is that when you try to, when it fails, you can't repair it. So you have to make it very reliable. So the lifetime of the satellite is going to be limited, or you have to make it very reliable and costly. So low Earth orbit satellite has a very interesting out. I want to use commodity electronics. I just buy it, use the Pentium in my computer and fly it. And I would fly 100, 1,000 of them. If some of them fail, I'll just schedule around it, okay? So now I have an out. I don't want radiation hard. If they actually got damaged by radiation in 3 years, oh, I'll launch a new one. I have a new generation of processor anyway. I need to refresh it. So there is a totally different economic equation for low Earth orbit satellite in the future. So that's why I think there's hope. Now, in addition, the question was asked by Facebook, but anybody of this
was by Facebook.
Yeah, any one of these web scale has a ground infrastructure. Okay, so there is a chance where the information injected into local satellite can touch a major access point of the ground infrastructure. All the satellite system require a mirror ground infrastructure for them to get all the information around and things like that. And many of these web scale companies already have the ground infrastructure worldwide, at least to major centers. So they have an advantage in providing transport on the ground when it needs to for a last feed, access feed by satellite. So I think there is hope. I hope they can do it. Unfortunately, I hear some of the low Earth orbit satellite company is going to file for bankruptcy next month. And these are the ones that are not well funded, not like Amazon. I hope they survive, or I hope some of them survive. It's not easy because satellite system has a very interesting behavior, low Earth orbit. If you don't launch a constellation, if they're big enough to give you 24-hour coverage, if you launch only a few, you'll get intermittent coverage. So there is a quanta of access that you require you to launch at least 100 satellites, if not more. So it is not easy. So the buying cost is expensive.
Okay, let me alternate between because we have a question here from Ms. Rada Hamouda. Rada, can you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question? Unmute yourself, we can't hear you. You are still muted.
Now.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't able to. Great, thank you very much. First, thank you. I'm American Egyptian. I've been here now, back from the US, living in Egypt for the past number of years, 10 years, going through this moment, a crisis moment that is reshaping and transforming every aspect of our lives. I have one kid in New York, one kid in Berlin, one kid here with me. They're adults now. But listening to you, and we have so many paradoxes going on that will be shaping how we emerge out of this. One of the paradoxes you talked about is about working and collaborating and the dialogue. When we have an inherent issue like trust, lack of trust between all the different stakeholders and the communities, and trusting the governments, when you're dealing with an issue as sensitive as privacy, what do you think would be there must be something that can unite us, but there is an issue of trust I'd like you to talk to. The second point, you talked about financing and how we finance, giving access. In order for us to address this, again, we have this paradox. The developing and developed is going to become the rich and poor. It has always been about the rich and poor, except that now the rich and poor is going to, as you articulated, very much tied into access to bandwidth, as access to technology and access to all of this. With the gulf widening, what motive how can you get developed countries or the global community to think of this as a global issue for the human family, as opposed to individual competitiveness, and go back to just some countries going into the dark age in terms of access to technology and others going. Thank you for your comments. And again, I truly appreciate your time with us this evening.
Thank you very much. You asked
I think you have to mute somebody.
Okay, have to move.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you very much. You asked a very important question in my mind. I want to, first of all, before I answer, note that I'm not an expert in many of this issue. So what I have to say next just came from me as a person, not from the communication society, and not come from any expertise. This is more than just a technical problem, okay, the inequity. And you talk about trust. How do we trust each people? Okay, what are the motivation? In fact, in my view graph, it says motivation. Okay, I didn't say the word motivation a while ago. What are the motivation behind it? How can I trust you? Are you my partner? Should I trust you as a partner? What are you going to get out of it? Are there profit to be seek that you didn't tell me? I think these are all very important things. I don't know the answer to that question. This is the kind of questions that have plagued human interaction for thousands of years. On the other hand, I think if we use some basic principle to guide our action, it may work. The basic principle being, we actually think about equality, non-discrimination, and the fact that we treat everybody with compassion. And with those as a motivation, you may be able to strike common grounds with very different people. Now, there is a big question between the have and the have-not countries. Why should the country who has a lot of money worry about the country that have less money? They're not geographically attached, they're very far away. Well, if you look at a long-term view of the world, if you have big disparity and unrest and all kinds of difficulty in healthcare, in food supply, in clean water supply elsewhere in the world, do you think the well-to-do country actually will continue to prosper? And this is no longer a localized economy, it's a world economy. If you look at the long view, if people subscribe to this, and I don't even know how well they would, because many of them are looking at local profit, you would say in the long term, it behooves that all of us work together towards a common goal. I think using an economic argument may be too long term. I think it's a weak. It's better to use an argument of compassion and equality. That require world leader to get together and try to agree on something sensible. I think it's a very difficult question. I can't appear to even offer a solution, but you put your finger in the most important question. And those of us who have some leverage in our respective life must try our best to try to push it in the right direction. And that's all I can say. I really don't have a golden solution to this, but you said the most important question that worries me.
This was a good one. I have next here, I have a question coming from Facebook, and it's from Muhammad Hisham. And this bringing us back to the late 1990s, Vincent. He's basically saying, what's the advantage of IP over WDM, IP over optical?
Okay.
How many years have we consumed trying to answer this question until we got the bubble busting in the early...
Okay. So I would expand the answer to this question, okay? For those of you who are not technically oriented, I want to humor you by telling you the story. IP, Internet Protocol, is a protocol invented probably 20, 25 years ago. And some of them invented by my own colleagues and people alike. And
more than 25, maybe 50 years ago.
maybe 50 years ago, it became in vogue, actually more so around the year 1995. Because what happened is that the previous format called ATM broke down massively around 1996, 97. In fact, the AT&T network crashed because of its efficiency. So IP is a way of providing packet service, and it seems to be very good. It has the nature of decentralized management and control, and packet switching is able to transport your traffic to wherever you want using a very simplified method that doesn't require a lot of memory to remember the path and all this good stuff. So it's very good. So what happened is that here comes optical network. And it went from 10 gigabit to 100 gigabit to recently 1.6 terabit single stream. My God, if you play Internet Protocol over this would slow down like a dog, okay? It is slowed down so much that you wouldn't even see the high speed. In fact, Singapore, who has a lot of advanced technology in broadband, about 10 years ago complained to me that we won't get more than a megabit per second download speed if we go look at a server in the US. And we have a 10 gigabit line. I don't understand. It was the Internet Protocol. I don't want to go into the detail. It wasn't matched to high bit rate, okay? In fact, it didn't know that the underlying channel is kilobit or megabit or gigabit. So it treats it as if they were the same. The data rate is infinite. The error rate is 0. The only reason why I slow down is because I lost packet, and that's the wrong reaction. So IP over optical in a single stream is basically TCP/IP for the Facebook question is dead, okay? The interesting thing is that up to about 5 years ago, I have people who invented IP become a religious community who would say, don't ever touch and try to rewrite a new protocol for the new system. Don't touch it. It's been working for 20 years. And it's become a religious argument. I said, wait a minute. I'll try to look into new protocol, which I did. And then when you find out the limitation, we'll be ready. So I think 5 years now, they stopped trying to say IP is good for all networks, and it cannot be modified. So the religious, I don't know why there's a cult about this. The religious fanatic has disappeared into the woodwork. At least they're totally silent because they know it doesn't work. So I don't think IP over a single stream optical network works. Now, you may see some of your rival web scale company publish paper, your rival down the street from you, Facebook, okay, say that I can use IP and get 93% throughput. What he used is not IP. I know what he turned off, what he modified. It's not the same IP. It's IP prime. They won't tell you exactly what it is, but that's not it. Okay.
Okay. Next, I think we have a good flow of questions here. We have. Let me go to the chat. Then we have Dr. Ghada Abdelhadi. I'm sorry, Dr. Ghada Abdelhadi. Dr. Ghada, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please? Dr. Ghada Abdelhadi.
Yes, I'm here, Ghada Abdelhadi, yes, Associate Professor in Faculty of Engineering, Modern Science and Arts University. First of all, thank you, Professor Tariq, and thank you, Professor Chan, for this wonderful meeting and seminar or sessions. I enjoyed so much your wonderful presentation, Professor Chan. Actually, by the end of your presentation, you mentioned, or we were talking about the research, and it's an urgent time to, it's a highly required research in this critical time. So my question is, I and my colleagues have many ideas about actually first how applying the artificial intelligence and machine learning in security. Especially, I'm specialized in cryptography and computer security in networking. So I'm asking about how we can communicate with you if you have plenty of time to make a research. Especially, we need to embed some quantum mechanics to study the behavior of this COVID in spaces. Okay, so we have a researcher in engineering mathematics, and I am in cryptography algorithms and applying artificial intelligence in this special field. So, so can you provide me with some research group to join to make this required research? Thank you so much.
Yes, in the Communication Society, there is a technical committee on security, and all you have to do is join them. Actually, they would have a meeting in the next month, a technical committee meeting. It is published on our website. And if you're a member of our society, you can actually attend. And then you'll find who are the experts. Now, this is not just US, this technical committee is worldwide. And it involves people from Asia and many different countries. And I urge you to do this. I'm glad you're thinking about AI and machine learning and on security. I just want to say a few words. Many of the AI machine learning as applied to security basically would say, okay, maybe I know the signature of this particular attack on the security of my network, and through machine learning, I actually get it categorized. So anytime it triggered itself, I would quickly decide what it is, and hopefully I'll react to it. That is most of the common push on this research. But if you notice, many of the very devastating attacks are what is called zero-day attack. Zero-day attacks are the attacks that have never been done before. So by definition, using machine learning algorithm, you're not going to learn that it exists because it had never been released before. So you may think that machine learning and AI algorithm is useless against zero-day attack, which is actually the most devastating attack, and most of the sophisticated one of this category. The answer is actually not so simple, because the machine learning and AI algorithm has a chance to survey the network traffic and the computer traffic to understand what's the nominal state. If the zero-day attack is going to trigger some action in the network, you would actually identify it as being abnormal. Now, there are many abnormal behavior. Some of them is due to congestion, and I'll give you an example. When Michael Jackson passed away, that day he died, okay, there was a lot of abnormal traffic because people were downloading his music from server.
I'm reading about that, yes.
Yes, and it crashed the internet. Okay, now that's a benign attack. It wasn't a security attack. The AI algorithm would flag this as not normal. And also there could be a network attack and they will flag it as abnormal. So you can use it as a first filter to say something abnormal is happening. Then you have to develop the next tool to decide whether this is, you know, a Michael Jackson event or really an attack on your network. That is not being done. But actually AI machine learning is useful to actually understand what's the nominal state that you've seen all this time. So I think it should be used as a cascade, the first screen filter.
I think we have 10 minutes, which are just enough for the two questions.
Okay.
two next questions. One of them is from this side, Dr. Madin, and the other one from Muhammad Aziz this side. And since Dr. Rada was on the chat, let me go to the questions from the Facebook attendance. And this is by Muhammad Aziz, who I'm guessing an Nile University student, Dr. Tala. Let's read this and understand why. Thanks a lot. The gigabit per second communications and networks still in the hope, which may take a long time or happen in the long term in Egypt. Are there any solutions in short term Egypt should develop or depend on, especially in education? Next semester, all education institutions need to work online. So this is a student who's not very happy with the situation and just worried about having better infrastructure.
Yes, I think it is very natural for students that don't have the access to be unhappy. Why not? It's just only natural. If you're not unhappy, there's something wrong, actually. Now, the question is, when you're unhappy, what do you do? Well, you go to people who can make a difference and try to convince him this is more important than they think. I think it's a very important issue. You have to make them understand that when you don't have access, you're not learning. When you don't have access, you're not seeing the rest of the world as the rest of the people can do. And this has to be somehow be recognized by the civic leaders. I don't care what kind of government you have. Somebody has to recognize it. Somebody who can do something must do something about this. And it's up to each individual community to organize this effort. And sometimes it requires the technical people to tell them the difference between 1 megabit and 10 megabit or 100 megabit. And you can do some demonstration. You can show them what can be done and what cannot be done. But after that, somebody has to follow up with the social economic aspect of this problem. And somehow, eventually, policy funding has to occur. And what I'm saying is that the pandemic has just accelerated this process by a factor maybe 10, maybe even 100. And we have no time to lose.
Okay, thank you. So this leaves us with the last question, and we exactly have 7 minutes. So probably this would be the last question, absolutely. This is Dr. Madian again, Dr. Ahmed Madian from our Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. Dr. Madian, go ahead. Unmute yourself first.
I don't see you.
He is coming. Wait, he's.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am here.
Go
Sorry,
ahead. Go ahead.
It takes time. Sorry. Thank you for accepting my question. I was the first question, and it's my luck to be the last question too. Actually, this discussion enriched my mind with a lot of ideas, and I was thinking while listening to you that in mid of 90s the communication was for the undergrad education, engineering undergraduate education. Most of the students was looking for the communication at mid of 90s as the highest in the market. So after this and at 20 and 20s, it become going more to the machine learning, AI, and mechatronics, robotics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you expect after this pandemic of COVID the change?
Good question. It is already started. You don't have to wait until the pandemic is over. I have some of my friends who actually work in communication equipment company, big ones, and people are ordering so much equipment, they have to do 24-hour shift to try to assemble this. The worst thing is that they have to respect social distancing even in the factory. So now the factory worker are spaced further apart, and then the assembly time is slowed down. And also many of the components came from China. Okay, fiber optics, many of them come from Wuhan. Okay, so you have a supply chain issue already. If you, I think you should look into the price of the network companies in the last couple of months. They are actually going up, whereas the rest of the stock are going down. So in fact, let me tell you about some of the rumors in the venture capitalist realm in the United States. For a while in the last few years, if you actually work on AI machine learning and you have a decent idea, you wouldn't have trouble getting funding from the venture capitalists, okay?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that actually had reduced. Okay, first of all, they don't want to invest in things they're not clear about. And second, they're actually rethinking. I don't think the traditional network communication ideas would have increased venture capitalist funding, but the innovative ideas that would give you better quality virtual reality and things like that, that would actually get better funded. I can see that. I don't want to have a good fortune in my area built on pandemic, but I think that our area is going to be very, very important in the next few years. And when you expand, the question I want to close with is that, can you let it just expand based on profit reason, based on earnings, or can you inject other aspect of it so people can think about what pathway they want to develop? I think this is the time to do it. You don't want to do it after they've done it. So I think every civic community needs to think through, is there a way that we should guide this future development? And just food for thought for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I guess
Dr. Tariq, before you close, can I say something?
Please, Dr. Azouz, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chen, for this valuable information that we received in different directions in the telecommunication, even it is terrestrial or satellite or whatever, but related to the LEO or the large orbit satellite that is still not yet in the surface till now, because this is the constellation that's just filing, and there is some satellite launched like SpaceX, for example, or whatever. But I just have from 2 days a coordination with some of these manufacturers for these satellites, and I asked a clear question for them: what is your target? They mentioned clearly the target, not all the people. The people does not reach by the communication to them easily. This is the first target for them. And it will be in the rural area, in the borders, on whatever these places that it is very hard to reach to them. So these areas not need a huge capacity for the internet. So they can start by it, because for example, one of the operator, one of the satellite operator mentioned exactly the service may be available in Egypt if Egypt accept in 2021, but they will start, for example, by the end of this year to give the service in not continuous all over the world, but it is temporary or this only for small areas. Like if we take one of them for America, for example, this year by 2020, and there is Canada will be beginning of 2021, and the end of 2021 will be Egypt. So, and I asked them also another question: what is the price for these services for the people? And they didn't decide till now about the exact price, because they didn't know what is the service will give and what is the final cost, because it's still launching, and the number of satellite will be a very huge number. If we wanted to cover all the world, it will be reached to the first phase 4,000 satellite, for example, SpaceX. The other ones, and you know what is happening with OneWeb, and there is Telesat, and there is a China satellite, and there is Facebook, and all of them. Amazon and so on. Still not yet, there is only files through the FCC as the administrator of America, just to register these satellites in the ITU, because before registration and coordination with all the countries that the service will be in the footprint. For these satellites, they should finalize the coordination first, and Egypt one of them. So still not yet services. So the people should concentrate mainly now on the terrestrial part, because this is the available and in the hand now. But for the satellite, still some time we need to wait until this service become, or we take the service from the geostationary, but this is not suitable for some of the smart applications, because the delay is reached to 500 or 600 milliseconds, but you need to reach by 5G, for example, 1 millisecond or 2 milliseconds or whatever. And the 6G, we don't know exactly what is the delay or what is the value will be.
So Dr. Azzouz, what time frame we are talking about before this becomes a reality for a country like Egypt?
If we consider one of the satellite operators that manufacture now LEO, this is not be before the end of 2021 or 2022. So
it's not far away. It's
not far away, but if you want to work with something on the prepare yourself for facing a problem like COVID-19, you need to start
next semester. Next semester.
So we need to build our system. I have a lot of points need to discuss, but I will keep it not now. I will communicate with the Professor Chet to discuss a lot of issues relative to the fiber, because I'm the responsible about the telecommunication and the smart cities in Egypt, especially the new capital of Egypt. So, and I am the manager or the responsible about the infrastructure for Egypt as a regulator from this point. So I need to discuss some points if you allow me. So I will write you later.
Absolutely.
And thanks anyway for this valuable information. It's a huge information. It's in different directions and different aspects. So thank you very much. And we hope we can see you without a pandemic like this. We see face to face in Egypt next time, inshallah.
Yes.
Thank
you very much.
Next time we'll bring him with us for a visit to you, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay.
You are welcome. You are welcome.
Yes. Okay.
I guess this brings us to an end. I know you have taken 3 extra minutes from what I promised you, Vincent, and I know that you have a meeting, and I have it in 3 hours and a half. At least for you to still be daytime, but for me to be after midnight. I really can't thank you enough for your generosity, for your knowledge, for your contribution, for accepting my invitation, and for enlightening us with such a fruitful talk that I hope that others have enjoyed it as much as I did. I want to thank all our guests, all those who have joined us and decided to come here. And I ask you please to stay tuned for next upcoming events for Nile University. This will continue. We believe that we are doing a very valuable service to our community at large. Please stay tuned for our next events. Thank you again so much. شكرا جزيلا لكل الإخوة اللي حضروا، وإن شاء الله نشوفكم المرة الجاية وتصبحوا على خير.